out of all the things I have failed at spectacularly, and there's been a lot, one that a lot of people don't know is I used to be a cartoonist. I tried to be a daily cartoonist, and I got into about 50 newspapers with a comic strip. And that's why I'm famous doing that today. It's harder. Our guest, Grant Snider, this is his new book, The Shape of Things, and it's a bunch of comics about the generation of ideas.
Exactly.
Give me the quick one.
Yeah, so most of them are about the creative process, the joys and pitfalls of it. A lot of them are facing the frustrations that every creative and non-creative person faces, and overcoming that through, the magical act of creativity.
All right. So there's about 20 years difference between us. Let me tell you about what it was like in the good old days. So I had this dream of being a daily cartoonist to have a comic strip, because back then newspapers had these great comics, and they weren't this big, they were this big. And the generation before had comics that apparently the Sunday funnies, one comic would take up a half a page or even a whole page.
They were beautiful.
They were beautiful, and it was just a wonderful way to express things. And that doesn't exist anymore. You cannot make a living as a cartoonist. I mean, if they're running reruns of Charlie Brown, and I love Charlie Brown, but there are no more newspapers, and there are very few comics in newspapers. So talk to me about being a cartoonist now.
So I come from kind of like a borderline generation where I grew up with that. I don't consider it the golden age of comic strips. I mean, it wasn't Little Nemo and Slumberland and these amazing, beautifully colored full-page strips, but there was still quite a bit of quality and space in the comics. I grew up reading Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts when Charles Schulz was still alive, and not endlessly running the reruns of his work, which is still great anyway, like you're saying. So I had the same dream of becoming a newspaper cartoonist someday. And I actually got my start, doing work for newspapers. I had my comic strip in the University of Kansas student newspaper, in print, not online.
That's how I started, the University of Colorado up in Boulder, yeah.
And that was a thrill to see my work in print, and I thought, okay, I know what's going on.
The thrill is when you see your comic that you drew pinned up someplace.
Absolutely,
you see it. Somebody thought it was funny enough to put on their desk.
I still remember that. Absolutely.
And the first time that happens, it must be like what a musician is feeling when he hears his song on the radio for the first time. Oh my God!
Somebody responded.
Somebody liked it. Somebody out there liked it.
I think I saw one in a dorm room when I was, a junior in college, and I was like, "This is really cool."
Yeah.
But yeah, so I thought after college I would, continue with the newspaper cartooning. I did some work for the local alternative news weeklies in the Kansas City and Lawrence, Kansas area, and eventually worked for the Kansas City Star doing a weekly strip for about 3 years. And at the same time, I began posting online. So as the journalism industry was having, some pitfalls, and cartoonists were being slowly minimized, and cartoonists were kind of being pushed aside. I mean, for pretty valid reasons, I guess. I would post my drawings online. And I realized at some point, okay, the audience that's seeing my drawings online is immensely bigger than who could ever see it in a local newspaper or an alt weekly.
It kind of reminds me of just how people are self-programming their lives now.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of waiting to hear the song on the radio, you go to Pandora or you stream it the way you want. But in the good old days, you submit your cartoons to some organization called a syndicate. If they like it, then maybe they pick it up and they try to sell it to newspapers and give you a pittance, and they take away the rights for it. I think about all these old cartoonists who died in their chair because they didn't own their own creations. So now online, it's all you.
Absolutely, yeah. Right. And that's I think is an awesome thing, but it's also somewhat terrifying because there's no one telling you, okay, you have to put this work out on this regular basis. If you don't draw a comic, no one's going to notice. It'll just kind of slip away. There's not like a specific space you're trying to fill, and that's a big challenge because with the constraints of a newspaper, it's okay, fill these boxes, say what you need to say and get out. And I think that the constraints are actually pretty helpful for creativity.
The constraints I found were really difficult in that, one, you had a deadline.
Oh, yeah.
They needed to run the strip, you needed to get it to them. But also, since it was a family paper, you had to be very bland. At least I thought you had to be very bland.
Yeah, that's true.
And it was fun. I tried to do more of a libertarian version of Doonesbury or Bloom County, and it didn't go over well. All right, so every time I got into a new newspaper, I got kicked out of another newspaper.
Yeah.
I had a trustee of a liberal arts college who was black, who didn't understand the term black humor, so he thought it was racist. I'm out of there. I was in the Washington Times, and I had a joke that said something about is a pope celibate or something like that. That angered a nun.
Oh yeah.
And I got kicked out. You know, so it just kept going and going and going. So it's got to be freeing to do it online. But how do you know if anybody's reading it?
So another one of the wonderful and terrible things about putting work online is social media is instant feedback. So when I post a comic, I'm posting it to Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, whatever new social media thing that I'm told to know about, you know, and hasn't been discovered yet. I need to be posting it there as well. And you can instantly see, okay, this many people saw it, this many people liked it, this many people shared it. I have these comments. And that's, I mean, it's a lot different than, okay, the occasional letter from a reader, or, you know, whether it be an angry letter or a letter of praise. You see those letters instantly. And so, I mean, I think that's, once again, just kind of the beauty of the new space that people are creating work in. But it also can be like almost a rabbit hole of, okay, well, this one didn't get me as many likes as last week. Was it not as good? I mean, sometimes that can be a little bit inhibiting to creativity if you think of it in that regard.
I had a few. I would have been a successful cartoonist except for 3 limiting factors I had no control over. One, I couldn't spell, still can't.
Yeah.
I couldn't draw, and I wasn't all that funny. But other than that, man, I was a great cartoonist.
It's a good start.
Right. Now, I did it for about 5 years, and I made enough money to be poor. I always needed to have another job. The goal was to become one of those guys, Sam Waterston from Calvin and Hobbes, or, you know, my hero, Burke Breathitt, who did Bloom County, to be one of those guys. You know, the idea of sitting in your house in your underwear, making cartoons and getting royalty checks, that's what I wanted. I never made any money. Now, you've become very wealthy doing this.
Let's fast forward 10 years from now, and I hope that statement's pretty accurate.
You're not making a living. You make some pocket change on this, but you got a real job.
It's good. I mean, I can't complain. People buy the book, people buy my work in poster form. It's flattering. If I would have looked at where I am now 5 years ago, I'd be like, no way, that's not going to happen. So, yeah, it's modest, but it's still pretty cool.
You say the poster form.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about stuff like this?
Yeah. So
this is more of a
that's a book promotional poster. But if you open the book, I mean, all those comics are slightly condensed from the scale I draw them at. So I typically print most of these at like 11 by 17 form, which is about the scale I draw them at, and some people like them enough to put on their walls, whether it's like a classroom or a library, or, you know, my uncle in Colorado Springs put them all over his bathroom, which I thought was awesome. So I try to make the work in a way that you're entertained by reading it, but you also want to, you know, have it with you and be able to look at it throughout the day and give you some inspiration in that regard.
The old model, you sell the comic strip, the newspaper pays the syndicate, you get a cut of it. If you're really good and successful, you put out a comic book.
Right.
If you're really, really successful, you have some merchandise. For me, back in the day, was Opus the Penguin dolls. They were very popular, but, you know, Snoopy dolls, and then you can license, and then you become massively wealthy.
You become Charles Schultz.
Right, exactly. How do you do that today? How can a cartoonist make a living today? And go ahead 10 years, and you're now only making money off of this. How are you making money off of it?
I think it's still probably merchandising. I know it's a struggle for a lot of creative people. I know Bill Watterson, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, if you read his books, he has countless fights with the syndicates about, okay, I don't want there to be Calvin and Hobbes dolls or license plates. I mean, you still see those around, but none of them are licensed. So I think probably the trick to people who are really successful at doing that, I'm not one of those yet, is figuring out the right form where you're still true to your message and true to your creative spirit, but also have something that people want to buy and want to, you know, put on their wall or put on a mug, or, you know, have around them at all times.
Talk to me a little bit about creativity. All right? So the book is about creativity.
Right.
You explore it via cartoons.
Absolutely.
So first of all, what is creativity? Because I've always thought that, especially with cartoons, everybody could do 3 great cartoons. Right. They all have them in them, but to
they're
do
all
it
in that
over
book. No, there's only
this book. Which 3 were not doing?
Yeah.
So what is creativity to you?
Well, to find the full answer to that, you have to read the book, The Shape of Ideas. I think that question is something I ask every time I sit down at the drawing table. I think a lot of times creativity for me is finding an unusual or unexpected solution to a problem. So for me, the problem every time I'm at my drawing table is, here's a blank page, there's a space that's going to have a comic strip in it, how do I fill that space and still be insightful, entertaining, all the above? If I can find a creative and unexpected solution to that problem, I think that's essentially creativity.
Is there a key? Did you have
Yes.
through all your exploring, have you found the key to creativity? What is it? What
I
helps?
find it anew each time, but I think a lot of it is, as boring as it sounds, repetition. So if you were to sit down and give me a piece of paper and say, be creative right now,
You can't do
the
it.
results are not going to happen. But if I sit at my drawing table morning after morning and I tell myself, okay, now I'm going to be creative, now I'm going to be creative, eventually you just get bored enough, you do something creative. I mean,
And also, there's something about the limit. Here's a piece of paper. It's not this big, it's this
Limitations,
big. You gotta do
constraints,
it.
yeah.
Limitations help with creativity, which makes no sense.
it makes
All
no
right.
sense.
Grant, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're in town for this. Buy the book, Amazon, great bookstores everywhere, right?
Go to your local bookstore, go to Amazon, it's all over. So thank you so much.
And thank you. Listen for me on KHOW Radio. Check me out at the Denver Post. Tell a friend about the Independence Institute, and we'll see you next week.